course, I think will, require sort of other packaging and so on. But it was so powerful and combined was so easy and convenient that I thought, let's inform more sports about it at this LTAD lunch. So, Brandy, if I've forgotten, or Barb, have I given kind of enough nuts and bolts on it? Okay, sure. So, Brandy, I'm going to airlift it over to you. And again, if I forgot something, mistaken something, your turn to rock.
All right. Thank you. Oh, I'm super excited to be participating this way. It's just fun. And I'd like to just point out that I've just come to realize I've got this massive double chin going on. And thanks for the webcam. I'm now going to go throw up my lunch and go run home. So, I'm totally distracted by that. Okay, so I think Vicki, you gave a great update and an overview of the project, and just to go back a little bit further is we started working with community partners back in 2010 on the concept of injury prevention in sport and recreation. And back in 2010, Ontario had a building with provincial sport organizations in it, and so we had this great community. So we've since lost that. So we're struggling a bit here in Ontario. But we had these community engagement sessions where we explored what injury prevention means, how we can learn from other sectors that have had success, and how we can draw on the tools and the mechanisms and the methods that they've used to identify injury issues and address them and measure them and be able to evaluate interventions and whatnot. And our first stumbling block back in 2010 was the fact that we can't identify the injury problem. We don't know what it looks like because we don't have the data. So we felt that we weren't able to move forward in the cycle, the model of injury prevention without adequate data. So we knew simultaneously we had to address some of the education issues and some of the sort of global definitions of injury and safety in sport, but knowing all the while that we had to be building a system that would facilitate understanding what the injury problem is. And so that's what we've been focused on since 2011-12. We launched a rudimentary version of an injury tracking program at the 2012 Ontario Summer Games, and we felt it really shone a light on the appropriateness of using web-enabled technology for injury surveillance, particularly given all of the the distance issues and just the equity issues across all of the different sport organizations, and knowing that this kind of technology was becoming much more accessible. At the time in 2012, we equipped every site with an iPad that was not only Wi-Fi enabled, but had a data card in it, so we didn't have to rely on Wi-Fi. But now we know that the vast majority of the population have access to wireless technology and internet technology. That we didn't want the actual device to be a limitation or a barrier to collecting injury data. So we've tried to just strip away every possible barrier that an organization would have in activating some sort of injury surveillance protocol. And so we continued working with the web-enabled model, and in 2013 we tried another version, and we used Android tablets as well as the iPads, and we found great success. That was at the International Children's Games in Windsor, Essex. Another multi-sport event, so held over a number of days over multiple facilities involving hundreds of athletes and thousands of volunteers. And I should say that we built the platform itself, the questions that we were using based on the research that we had done, the environmental scans we had done about other surveillance programs that were being used in sport, whether that was at the Olympic level or at the community sport level. And we just worked with each event to narrow the focus and modify questions so that they were accessible. And so we looked at, in particular, the 2008 Beijing Games was the first place where the Olympics had tracked injury. And then we looked at the 2012 London Games where they tracked injury and also illness. And we looked at models that they had developed in Australia for community sports specifically, and they were using paper-based forms, so we wanted to try to find a hybrid model that would take the best of the data surveillance questions and modify them in a way that could be used in a web-enabled forum. And so that's where we've moved to. We think that we have nailed down the questions. We've also married them to match the international classification system that's used in the Canadian hospitals to identify and classify injuries, so that at some point we will be able to do an apples-to-apples comparison, so that we can see, if the hospitals are reporting 50 injuries from hockey, that we would be able to check back on the hockey database and see if there are 50 injuries and if they match. Because right now we don't have that ability, and so we're overly reliant on that hospital data system, which doesn't provide us with nearly the kind of information that we need to inform prevention strategies or to help measure the success or the failure rate of those prevention strategies. And so that's sort of a bit of background on the development of the tool. At the moment, we had a grant with the Ontario Trillium Foundation to help with those initial projects and events. We were using the Fluid Survey platform, and they were recently bought out by SurveyMonkey. And so we had, it seems like we weren't the only Fluid Survey customers that were concerned about data being moved to the States on the SurveyMonkey platform. So I just spoke with our representative at SurveyMonkey, and I can confirm that they are launching Canadian servers by the end of June of this year. So right now our platform is the Alberta model is using SurveyMonkey. And we're going to be switching that over to the Canadian servers. And in the meantime, we're not collecting any personal information. So in any event, we've never been in violation of any privacy issues. But to confirm that all of the data moving forward will be stored in Canada. And so it's a system that's accessible to any organization. We're using a souped-up version, and we're following all the protocols required by the hospital in terms of protecting personal data. And we think it's important that we start collecting these injury profiles for organizations collectively. At the same time, organizations need to be doing this individually. But if we can do it together, I think the entire system will be stronger for it. And I think if we can do that under the premise of quality improvement and not looking so much specifically at what we can do about injury or looking at a specific injury like concussion, but if we start to look at how we can improve the quality of our sports systems, and injury being one of those quality measures, and perhaps we could say that concussion would be one of those quality measures, but we don't need to be limited to that. So I think we have the ability, and we've got the knowledge and the expertise. You certainly have that expertise right there in that room with you and on the line to start developing what the quality indicators are for sport in Alberta. And we can start measuring towards those and understanding better what they mean and how we can achieve them if we're not there yet. And so that's a very brief and unplanned summary of the system to date. Are there any questions so far? Have I lost anyone? Anyone sleeping?
No questions so far in the chat box. Any other questions in the room?
Brandy, just one comment about that. When we think about injuries, we often think it is just about the injury, and yet because injury, as Brandy points out, is a huge indicator of quality of sport experience, it also has potential ramifications for coach education, coach development. What is the training and performance environment like for the athlete? So if these cover not only the chronic or the acute injury that might occur during a discrete moment in time, but also covers those chronic overuse injuries. So I think the potential for this to be extremely revealing about appropriate development and appropriate sport training has all kinds of arms and legs to it. So I just wanted to add that in, Brandy, before you head off.
Yeah, I think it really, and we only briefly had this conversation over the weekend in terms of how we can leverage this sort of approach to look at some of those long-term outcomes that Vicky's talking about with respect to chronic and overuse injuries. So Barb and I started talking. Barb helped me out here, but I think it was probably back in 2015 when we first connected.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we started talking about how we could connect around building a system in the province of Alberta that could look at injury surveillance. So not looking specifically at one sport, and to up until that point, the work that we had been doing with other sport organizations was singular. So Barb posed a new challenge to see how could we do this with multiple organizations simultaneously. So it took us a bit to work through that process, and Barb worked wonders connecting with the sport community and engaging some of the organizations to participate with us on this little journey. And so we launched in, I think it was like the last week of December or the first week of January, that we made the system available to 3 or 4 organizations. And we've had some good feedback and a better understanding of what injury looks like, particularly in volleyball. And I'll just show you. So I don't know what you guys can see, but can you see my screen?
Yep.
So if I'm going to get rid of this box here. Let's see. Nope, I got rid of the wrong box. I'll get rid of that.
I'm just going to add to your discussion. So we wanted to kind of test the system itself before we really launched it, because we wanted to make sure there was usability for the different people and who was going to be using it. Like, that was a really huge thing, because we didn't know if we were saying, you know, maybe the athletic trainers should be filling out, but a lot of teams don't have athletic trainers. But who will it be? The parents? Will it be the athletes themselves? So we needed to make sure the survey had really specific things that we were asking them. So it's been a process, actually. Like, we've been discussing it for, oh gosh, I don't know, maybe 8 months or so, trying to figure out what we wanted in Alberta itself, because we've made an Alberta version that could, that the couple sports have been utilizing, because there were certain things when we talked to Vicki that we wanted to get out of it, and still be cautious of the FOIP issue kind of thing, right?
Yeah. And I think also we changed the name of the tracker. So originally we just called it the Play Safe Injury Tracker, and then through discussion with your group and led by Vicki, we talked about adding that durability piece, because it's more than just about the injury. It's about building durable athletes in Alberta. What does that mean? And so that's where that quality piece, I think, originated. So yeah, I think the intention is to look at this a little bit more broadly, and but we're starting here with the injury piece. Barb, you made me think of something else there. The language. Yeah, we worked through the number of questions, and anyways, I'll just show you. So this is a demo version on the Fluid Survey platform at the moment, just because it's set up and it's easy to show you. But the idea here with the data collection is that it's as simple as humanly possible. And that whether it's done on a laptop computer like I'm using right now, or it's done on a phone or a tablet, the screen always adjusts to the size of the device, and everything is touch entry, so you can touch the screen. When you click on a field like this, it pulls up some easy to answer fields, so that you don't have to spend a whole lot of time. You don't have to be scanning across a page to try to see what the end of the sentence looks like, and you can touch on these quick pieces and answer the questions and move on to the next page. We know that nobody wants to focus on this piece. This is, this is boring stuff. This is not sexy sports stuff. So we have to make it as simple as possible, and at the same time, we need to ask the relevant questions that will help the organization make informed choices in terms of prioritizing their very limited prevention time or their quality improvement time. So we ask a lot of questions that are not just text entry. Here at the venue facility, depending on the organization, we have the ability to make these already filled in. So it's like a drop-down menu that would have, a list of the 20 facilities where that sport or that organization houses most of their competitions or their training sessions. It's also customizable, so if the language isn't necessarily appropriate for your organization, or you want to make a change in a question, or you want to ask some additional questions, we have the ability to do that. So we've had some sports that have asked to include some really unusual questions, and we're always happy to support that. The idea is that this provides the organization with the information they need to make those informed decisions. And so it can't just be a one-size-fits-all approach. And that's one of our characteristics of the Play Safe program, is that we understand that it can't be one-size-fits-all. So here in part 3 on the injury reporting, you can see that we've got some different names for different parts of the body. And here's where we start to align with the hospital reporting system. So eventually we can do a little bit better comparisons with the data that's being collected in that environment. So we tried to include the language that's accessible to the average coach or parent, but also relates to the medical system. So thoracic spine, we have upper back, sternum and ribs. We have, let's see what else we have with the type of injury here. So abrasion, graze, and blister. And the medical term for bruise is contusion, so we've included the bruise word. Same with cut, open wounded, laceration. So we've tried to make the language as accessible as possible while still maintaining the integrity of that other data collection system. Again, you see that everything is a checkbox. We're not asking for much by way of storytelling, except here for question 14. Because there's some evidence that people like to tell stories, so we've included that. We've found that with many of the forms that we've looked at, I've probably looked at 1 billion of them at this point, a lot of the forms were all storytelling. So it's like, tell us about the injury, tell us what happened, tell us where it occurred. And that kind of information, maybe it might have more detail in it, but it can't be used as an organizational tool where all of that can be compiled very quickly and provide the organization with a good sense of what's happening. It might be important for that specific injury, but I would argue that for the most part in the system, we just want to track what's happening and develop the larger picture understanding of injury in your activities, and then the organization can dig in more deeply on specific injuries, and they can follow up in a different way that's more responsive to the individuals. But the injury data collection form is not the place for that kind of storytelling. We also think that the risk management piece is important for organizations, and to keep track of the kind of treatment that's provided immediately following injury. And we've just heard, not to scare anybody, and it's not happening on a widespread basis, but I think it's important that an organization captures this information, because there are occasions where people will go back to the organization and seek remedy, financial remedy or legal remedy of some sort, resulting from an injury. And so the organization needs to have some tracking mechanism to understand what happened immediately following, so that they can protect themselves and show due diligence. So again, it's all touch enabled. You haven't seen any personal information collected to this point. And here we have the option for people, if they want to include some personal information, they can. So we asked to identify who was the treating person, and then who's completing the form. So to this point, we haven't seen any personal information about the athlete, and that's really important. And again, this isn't a personal individual injury tracking piece. We're not looking to follow an injured participant through the course of recovery and back into play. This is an organizational tool aimed at understanding that big picture and informing prevention strategies. So I'm going to go to the real magic, which is what happens once the data has been entered. And it's not enough that we just collect it, but the information needs to be shared back to the organization in real time, as far as I'm concerned. There's no point in getting a report back a year later that shows that you had 5 broken legs in one facility on, over the course of 1 week. It's useless to know that information so late after the fact. So all of the information, once it's entered, is available online. It can be password protected, but the organization, the person who's designated to have a look at the data can pull it up. They can pull up the raw data. They can pull up reports just like this one. So you don't need to be an epidemiologist or scientist of any sort to understand what these bars and charts look like and represent. And you can very quickly identify, who's been injured the most. This is just dummy data in this particular report. But you can very quickly identify some priority areas. So you could say, okay, well, we have players who are being injured during cool down, and they're mostly exacerbating a chronic injury. So maybe that's telling us something about too much practice time or too much competition, and maybe we'll start to explore that a little bit further. Again, with the kinds of injuries, it's a very simple count, the percentage, and it shows you where you should be prioritizing. So, using this dummy data here, I probably wouldn't prioritize dental injuries as something that the organization should be addressing. So it doesn't really matter what this data shows. Again, it's just dummy data. But the idea is that it's dynamic, it's real time, it's easily accessible by the organization to understand and to set priorities and to measure the effectiveness over time of the different interventions that they develop along the way. Are there any questions about the injury form or the reporting process?
I think we have a couple. First, from my end, I noticed in the input, is there any capability of inputting a postal code for mapping, understanding something, a value add to the user to look at where are these injuries happening, that type of thing? Is that being considered at all?
Yeah, so I think it probably depends province to province in terms of that that privacy piece and what's considered to be private information. And depending on how many pieces of data you have, if you have a postal code and you only have one injury, then it might be easier to identify who that person is. So I think it's a consideration for each of the organizations to make. I think the geomapping is really important and helps us to identify, and I think understanding the venues, specifically where injuries are happening, is very important. I think it would be tremendously interesting to see where the groups of people are that are injured. So I think the more information we can have, the better, and that's something that we can just simply explore. And as long as it's not breaching any privacy rules or laws, then we can collect whatever we want to collect.
Brittany,
and I think it's also important
for a second.
to know.
So on the Alberta one that we created, we did put postal codes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And it was actually, what we were gearing towards was postal code of the people, not the place where it was at. So we wanted to see where the people were coming from that were being injured. So it's an option.
It's definitely an option. I mean, anything is an option as long as we're allowed to collect it. Then the more information, and as long as it's useful information to us. Like if we have a point in asking it and we have a plan to use that kind of information to help us understand in the province where this is happening, then that's really useful information to have.
You mentioned some multi-sport events that were involved. Has, obviously for people in this room, has Canada Games Council been approached on that? Because I'm thinking essentially each contingent would have a medical liaison that they could track this, and it might be beneficial for that high performance piece. Yeah,
it was an amazing learning for us to participate in the Ontario Summer Games. What we found out was that from event to event, from host committee to host committee, there was just no institutional memory of what happened from a medical perspective. So when we were creating the medical plan, because our office was also the lead on the medical aspect of that event, we had no information to go on. So we had no record of injuries happening previous. We had, I don't know, maybe a 2 or 3 page report from the last medical chair, but we just had no count, no understanding of the kinds of injuries that were previously experienced in that kind of event. So I think it's tremendously useful to have some historical data from event to event, which can only help the medical chair and committee to organize and develop their plan going forward in terms of how many volunteers they need at each event and each site, and what the role is, and how much equipment you need, and how many Band-Aids you need, and how many pounds of ice you need. So all of that stuff is really important. And so, yeah, I can't stress enough the importance of having that kind of information. After the summer games, I think the Canada games were being held in Prince George. Did I get that right? Prince George in northern BC.
2015.
And yeah, 2015. So we were working with their medical team to see if it would be possible to do injury tracking there. And as far as we understood, the Canada Games have contracted to use a certain platform to track lots of things at those events, and injury is a very small part of it, but at the time at least they weren't open to a discussion about having simultaneous tracking using this system or making any changes to the system that they're using. So I think it's a tremendous opportunity lost. I think it could only help us to understand what happens at these events and how to assist the host organizations to better prepare. So no, I don't know. I mean, that was 2015. If something has changed, I'm not aware.
Yeah, because on that note, with Red Deer being host of Canada Winter Games in 2019, if that becomes, I mean, I would think it would be something that as hosts would be a potential to open for discussion. And hopefully, I think this is where a number of major game national organizations, over time from a Sport for Life perspective, they're realizing their insulation from individual sport organizations is not enhancing their work at either Canada Games, COC, OTP. It's one of these alignment issues. So there might, I mean, I'm thinking optimistically, is there, I'm hopeful, I realize you're not the individual making the decision, but do you think it would be worth continuing to ask?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if it's an interest of the host committee and if there's a will within the province and you see the value and you've got the capacity to help facilitate that conversation, I think it would be amazing to go back and have see if they're open to the conversation at least, and maybe they want to try a pilot. Maybe we do something simultaneously, sort of to parallel the system that they're using, and but we haven't engaged with them since 2015.
Yeah. Has Canada Games to date published or presented any type of reports on previous game injury findings?
Not that I've seen, no.
And that's hugely worrisome, is that, again, these kind of sequestered, highly important pieces aren't shared with the people that really need to know them. And
100%. And with all of your provincial games, too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You don't have this record. And then we ask committee organizations year after year to take a lead on something, and it's like Groundhog Day, right? We just do the same thing over and over again without having the right kind of information.
Yeah.
So we're not building on success. We're building on nothing every time, and it's a real shame, especially when we're doing that on the backs of volunteers that are already stressed out.
Another question from Bogey from Alberta Orienteering. I know she does a ton of work and great work with her new strategic direction with rec centers. So the question is, will this be a centralized database and offered to sport organizations to join? How about other sport program providers like rec centers? Will they have access?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no reason not to. The platform is set up in such a way that it can support any organization that wants to understand their injury profile and trends. So we've done a little bit of work with a municipality. I've had some challenges in that environment, and we've worked with Parks and Recreation Ontario for a number of years to try to get injury surveillance on the agenda, and it's just an uphill battle. I think as well the municipal environment just creates that sort of, there's the issue of the facility users versus the actual programs, and I think there's a sense that at the recreational level that injury isn't something that's a huge priority for them, and I don't know that they have the statistics to back that up, and that's what we keep suggesting, is that it's better for any organization to understand what's happening, even if their injury profile is 0, that's great, but it probably isn't, and in the meetings that we've had with numerous municipalities, we know that they do collect information, It's usually on paper, and it's usually stored in a director's office in a drawer or a box somewhere, and it's never, they never look at it. So they're not, I don't think they're approaching injury from the perspective of wanting to understand what it looks like and affect change in their system in a meaningful way. And that goes for a lot of organizations. Any organization that's tracking data right now is probably doing it on paper, and the information is being stored in a shoebox under a bed somewhere in somebody's basement in a sport organization, or in that drawer in somebody's office. And so we want to make sure that they have the right tool to access that data and get that data to the right people at the right time so they can make those informed decisions. So I think going back to the, and I'm probably going off on the municipalities because my husband works for one. So, and I spent probably, I don't know, 10 years working in my local community centers teaching skating lessons and supervising programs. So I have a strong passion for the recreation community. And I think it's definitely an opportunity. So if there are people who are passionate about understanding what injury looks like and they want to try this, then there's absolutely no restrictions.
Questions?
Brandy, when you showed the reports from the dummy data, does the individual organization create their own reports, those lovely colors? Can that be independently run as well?
Yeah, so what we need to experiment a little bit more with is what it would look like on a provincial level when we aggregate some of the data, so that if we wanted to look at a full age group of people playing in different sports, but as it is right now, so in the presentation that I showed on the weekend, that was Volleyball Ontario, or sorry, Volleyball's data exclusively. It's not mixed in any way, so I can create reports that are specific to the organization. And then we can also create reports that are based on age group or sex or whatever parameters we want, whatever variables we want to look at. So I think that's the magic in being able to do this on a provincial level, is that we can bring together a lot more information than if we're collecting it in siloed, sort of in a siloed fashion. And at the same time, when we're doing this collectively, the data is still compartmentalized. So it's not like basketball can access volleyball's data or volleyball can access basketball's data. Everybody can only see their own data. And that's just on the back end. That's how we set up the system. So we don't have enough data to look at an aggregate of what's happening in all of the sports that are participating in the pilot yet. And that's something that we'll see down the road.
And right now then, who could see that aggregate or the collection? So for instance, Alberta, we've got 3 sports: athletics, volleyball, and rhythmic gymnastics. Whose eyes would get to see the various contributions from those 3 individual sports?
Yeah, right now I'm the only one that has access to it.
Okay.
That's just the way we haven't set up like an aggregate report, but we would have to identify who the people are that can see it. So right now I've sent like Barb, correct me, but I sent you a link with a password protection originally to share with Jim, with volleyball. So we've just managed that on an individual basis because we've set this up in partnership with Barb and the Sports Medicine Council. So it's I don't want to make it sound like there's a formula or a recipe specifically to how we do this. I think there's certainly a formula and recipe with the kind of data that we collect, with the exception of some of the customization. But the how, I think, is really dependent on the environment in which we're trying to implement. And in some organizations where they're collecting data and they have a form, then we can just web enable that form and make that process a little bit easier for the organization, and we can reduce the paper and we can reduce the potential for papers to go missing or to be shared to the wrong people. But in an organization that's never collected injury data before, we've got a lot more work to do in terms of developing either some policies or a requirement for certain people to complete the injury forms. There's a lot of consideration for the how part, and I think there's a great amount of variability in that piece. I won't say that we know what the magic is, and I think that's part of what we're trying to discover with the pilot is what makes this easy, and what creates barriers and challenges, and how can we address those.
Perfect. Thanks, Brandy.
So there's been, yeah, I mean, obviously your presentation on the weekend struck a chord with some of our groups for sure. And there's also now there's follow-up. They're asking, how do we get onto this? How do we sign up? I'm just wondering, what are the next steps for groups to access the link and the platform?
Yeah, it's as simple as sending me an email, or on the playsafeinitiative.ca website, there's a link, and the organization can complete that link, and that'll notify me by email and start the process. And I see that there's a question about using the tracker with retroactive data. Yep, and that's fine. So we would just build the system to include the fields that you've already collected for, and we'd provide you a link, and you can enter in your data that you've already collected. Which can be helpful because then you're already down the path. I think the only issue would be is if your definitions of injury are vastly different from ours. We may need to do a little bit of a translation process between. So it's dependent. But if it's similar enough, then we can probably work with the previous data that you've collected.
Brandy, from just an Alberta perspective, would it make sense that if they have to contact you to kind of get the initial setting of the table to work with this, that because Barb and her organization are going to be managing the coordination of informing that whole piece? What do you think about that?
I love it. Everybody call Barb.
Yeah. Well, and I think rightly so, that as this becomes more, to me, it's one of these opportunities that is going to create huge impetus, not only within sport, across sports, at all the different levels, but also become this this thread that's going to reach out to other sectors. I mean, right now, Bogey's already asked about reaching out into recreation. I can see this potentially going into education as well. But at a point of learning as we go is, without burdening you with everything on this, around keeping in mind how do we create this as a larger collective, is this how to create either aggregate individual data, other training about how we go, maybe any thoughts on, I don't know, just it's that true iterative, learn as we go, and it's a wonderful opportunity that it is not written in stone.
No, yeah, we're definitely on in uncharted waters. Yeah.
So keep yourself and Barb in the loop. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's best probably the way we've already established. Barb, is that okay with you if we direct everyone to you?
Yeah, that's.
So if we can do an official posting and I can get it up on our CSFRA website, our hub going forward. I know we're in the process of getting the new piece up on our newly constructed website, but if we can house that there, that we're going to be through this piece directing it through, if we can get some official,
Yeah.
And I think we're going to start working on some additional pieces as we start to get some feedback from the original organizations about maybe answering some of the questions that will provide more information than maybe I'm providing right now in terms of those facilitators and barriers, and some of the things that we've learned already about what makes this easier, and the kinds of information that an organization can share to encourage their participants to share their injury information with the system. And so there's a lot of those soft pieces that we can already start to develop to answer some of those early questions that an organization might have.
Great.
And Brandy, I'm sensitive that you're already into your planning time, but I think Barb might be able to, what I was going to say is that I think Barb can speak on behalf of the sports that are currently running a pilot as to what excited them about using this. Because again, it comes from different reasons. And I think you're okay with that.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't want to take you up any more of your time because I know in a very short period of time we're going to be taking up more of it anyway.
Right. Well, thanks for letting me just talk off the top of my head today. I hope I sounded somewhat coherent. If there are any questions, yeah, please let us know. Barb first than me, or if it's just some basic questions, I'm happy to answer. And I think everybody's got my contact information. And thank you all so much for the excitement. And as I said on the weekend, you've got tremendous capacity in Alberta. You've got amazing expertise right there in that room. And I can't thank Vicki and Barb and Marvin enough for the support of this project. And so I look forward to continuing to work with you and to learn about this and how we can share it with our counterparts in the other provinces. This is great work, and I'm just so excited to be working with my Alberta friends.
That's great, Brandy. Thank you so much for
right.
and the very quick response. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Brandy. Any other questions or comments we want to make, either online or within the room?
Just talk about Vicki and the question she just posed. You know what? When I talked to Vicki about this at first, I was like, we gotta do this in Alberta. This is like a no-brainer. We just didn't know how it was gonna be, and we didn't want to reinvent the wheel at all. So Vicki had contacted me with Brandy, and you know, there's so many things that can come out of this, like as in like coaching styles in certain areas of the province, where injury is happening, and then looking at maybe you need to change the way that you're doing things in certain areas. It was really there, and you can take it at different levels, administrative, managementally, coaching wise, even all the way down to grassroots, right? So instead of putting, I don't know if it's like the horse before the cart or cart before the horse or whatever, because once you get the data, you can make, I think, very good decisions on programming and the way that you want your sport to be ran. So when we were talking about this, and I just approached a couple of people that I thought would be very good champions for this pilot project, and we only really started this in January. So we really wanted to have something so then when Brandy presented in April that we had some kind of data or anything. And it was really funny because for the first month we had nothing. And we were like really sad, but then we were also really excited because there was an injury happening, right? So it's a catch-22 where you think maybe the injury is actually happening and might not be. So it's kind of an eye-opener. When I was looking at some of the volleyball stats, it was crazy the age ranges and what specifically. Of course, there was ankle injuries, but there was other things that came into play with that, and it was just really kind of cool to see. So those sports saw a lot of good value in it. Again, at all different kind of levels. So it has a potential to be very, very powerful for your organizations.
Adding on to that is that often we come to this whole thing about injury with our own perceptions and experiences around injury. For instance, we often, well, maybe I'll ask the group, do you think injuries happen more during training or competition? Training, I'd say. How many people say training? And I can't, I mean, if you want to can participate in the chat box, by all means. And then how many people say competition? Yeah. And how come you think one or the other?
More training than generally in competition in real sport.
Yes, so yeah, from a volume point of view. Yeah.
Yeah, like with like volleyball and basketball, there's like 30 games, 5 practices, so of course you're going to get broken into the game, like a real, like say a college basketball environment where you have 5 practices a week and 1 game.
Yes, yeah. Right. And Aaron, you said competition.
Yeah, because there's uncontrollable variables when it comes to competition, I believe.
Yeah.
And that relates to, the forefront, the concussion piece, things like that. I can't manipulate a competition like I can for the safety of my players when it comes to much training I can implement those safety stuff. So that's why I feel that there's more
competition.
competition.
Yeah. And the current literature, surprisingly, is fairly thin on that. So what do we end up doing? We operate based on our assumptions. And that's not a good way to proceed in any type of sport, based on our own gut feeling. So this becomes a way in which we can start to tease out where are injuries happening. If we believe that injuries are preventable, avoidable, but again, some sports actually think, well, injuries are just part of the game. Well, no, they aren't. And again, that's something that the literature is very clear about, is that most sport or recreation-related injuries are absolutely preventable. So then it throws it back as to what awareness is the sport engaged in. So all of that kind of information with the 3 sports that wanted to jump on this, it also became an opportunity to examine discrete portions or programs within the sport. Do you want to look at maybe one particular event? Let's say a tournament. You want to just crystallize what the heck is going on in this tournament. Maybe you want to examine what's going on in a particular coach's training program. I think as a coach, you might want to know that if your sport or injuries in general lead to the exodus of athletes, wouldn't a coach want to know what's going on in their own program, in a club? So it has all of these different kinds of ways of parsing it to benefit the sport. So I think there is lots of different opportunities within that.
The other thing that we wanted to capture is, so it actually kind of started with me approaching her about concussion stuff. And we were finding that a lot of the information, or people would get concussed and they wouldn't go to the doctor. So they were like either managing it at home or no one knew what was happening, right? So we wanted to capture those things that were going to the hospital, because that's where a lot of our stats were coming from, was from the hospital. And it wasn't capturing the whole kind of idea, the whole environment was what happened. So when we decided to do this kind of pilot and made it more Alberta kind of just information that we wanted to pull, like the postal codes and all that kind of stuff, see where it was, things were happening. And the idea of the training area as opposed to the competition area, it's really fantastic, and it's so exciting to be a part of.
One of the sports that are piloting this has any pushback from athletes, coaches, or parents?
No, they have actually, volleyball's been probably the most excited about it. They went to their board and they said, we really want to do this. And then they pushed it out to their membership, and they've been pushing through Twitter, they've been pushing through just their newsletters, correspondence, and they've been really excited of what's come back for them. And I think it also, some of the information that's coming back, it kind of shows they're doing things right in some areas too, right? There's always a positive you can take. There are negatives, but there's also positives that you can take out of this and say, you know what, we're actually putting our energy towards the right things right now, right? And it can change from year to year. I don't know if you're finding different age groups are doing different things and stuff like that. So it's really kind of cool.
I think that was a really good one to choose just because of the volume club activity that's taking place, between that January time period and once they finish up their provincial championships. So it'll be interesting to see this year and then to track another year and to see what the data looks like on a regular basis.
It's so cool. So cool.
Thanks, Jenny.
Sorry.
We have about 3 minutes left. So any wrap-up messaging?
So from the growth pilot or from you guys, like, who would you be marketing to build?
See, and that's what we were trying to figure out. Like, that's why we were doing this pilot. We're like, well, who is going to be doing this? And actually, with the volleyball stats, we were finding it was mostly parents, which was kind of neat in the way that, we didn't know if the message was getting across at all. And then also, if it was a usable form that, like, I don't mean to say this mean, but in a layman's kind of way that anyone could fill out that form, and that's what we really want.
Are people actually going to fill it out if somebody got a bruise though? I mean, that was one of the things that she had listed as an item. You know, like, I would say in most sports, maybe not really gymnastics, maybe I'm wrong, if you don't get a bruise, you're not training hard enough.
I don't know, and that's another thing that we haven't really totally discussed, and it's again stuff that we're going to talk about once we kind of collect that and kind of look at the whole picture, is how we would like to see it distributed and how much emphasis you want to put on certain things, right? And again, that's all up to the person. Like, sure, I would actually like to know if there was a bruise or not. Could be a bruise on your ankle, and then you can't run. Like, there's a lot of things, right?
To me, injury means unable to continue. Anything else is kind of incidental.
Okay, but and I look at it a little differently. That could be just like an incident, and an injury, you could still play with an injury depending on where it's at, right?
Or practice, yeah.
You're right, so.
And I think the front piece of the document, that we wanted the language to be, I remember we worked on that around when people sign on to the website, the first thing we talk about is, you know, we're doing our best to avoid injuries. You know, it indicates, you know, quality programming, safe environments, appropriate coaching, all that kind of stuff. So I can't remember, I can't think if we can pull it up right now or not, but I'll see if I can find that. But
like, it was kind of our point that we kind of said, this is what it's for, or this is what we're kind of looking at doing, and what we're trying to collect. Really, like research.
The severity is in a work in progress.
yes, yeah. And I think it is a bit of that, the work in progress, but it's also how the injury was managed in the moment and what the recommended next steps are. So if it is something that in the moment might be, in the opinion of all, well, you were still able to compete, you know, was there simply that moment you went down on a knee? This all becomes learning.
And one of the reasons I brought it up is because, you know, anytime you want to get a database, it needs to be complete. Otherwise, it's a diminishing value. And so people, you know, one group people consider a bruise significant, one don't. All of a sudden your data is skewed. Oh, bruises aren't a problem. Well, they're a problem because nobody's reporting it because they don't think of that as an injury. And so I'm picking on bruise because bruise can be pretty minor. But, you know, some people will perceive that it doesn't take you out of the game of practice. It's not an injury. And so you can have an awful lot of what I would say probably were injuries not reported. Sprained ankle, maybe that you finish the practice, and the next day you can't walk on it. You know, you might not consider it injury at the time, but it's going to keep you out the next two practices. Yeah, that's an injury.
Right.
My way of thinking. But somebody else may perceive that differently.
And you're right, any self-report research process is going to be flawed by that very issue of individual interpretation. And the way we overcome it is by accumulating mass data. So everybody's perception, even in this room, is going to be highly variable, and as a result have unpredictable validity. And so then what we do as a sport organization, start to accumulate data and making sense of it as we go, so that if we're tracking either reported or unreported, and then to what extent is it occurring in younger age groups where perhaps it shines a light that those kinds of things have no business even happening in that under 12 group. So maybe it doesn't, maybe it's the mechanism by which we can start to improve training. Maybe it's by revealing what good things are doing.
Maybe it's a service that is like flawed, and that's where they're getting, that's where it's happening, and you have to look at that. Like, there's a bigger picture. Oh, sorry, David.
No, that's a good addition. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, we've run out of time. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So for follow-up, we'll be putting together a little messaging and forwarded and accessing all the expertise at the Sport Medicine Council of Alberta. Feel free to go down and visit them. They're on the first floor of the PPC. Go say hello. And a lot of great discussions surrounding that. Okay? thanks for everybody attending online virtually. And I just want to mention for June 7th, our next session, we'll be following up with the quality sport checklist from Sport for Life. They have a new platform, a new document that they want to share with us and get some recommendations and some suggestions from the community in Alberta. So look forward to seeing you all then.
Great.
Thanks again from Brandy and and Vicki again for her expertise. Awesome.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thanks for coming, guys. Barb, awesome to have you. Thanks for everything.
Thank you.
I